So it appears that California is basically 100% going to be conducting a recall election to determine whether or not Newsom is recalled as governor, Gavin Newsom. They have, especially if you go into this is pretty much where you're getting the signatures. If you go into right-wing California, Republican California, they have been trying hard ever since he was initially elected to get him recalled. And so now they're jumping on it. The main jump on thing was the dinner that he had. That was the big scandal for him, which, was obviously it was a bad look for him and it was a bad move for sure. But, the idea of recalling him on that alone is pretty stupid. But obviously what's concerning to me is the people attempting to do this recall, which are Republicans who are trying to recall him from day one. And it's a bunch of people who are angry about the lockdowns and being forced to wear masks. So obviously I'm not going to get behind any sort of situation like that. But we have some polling numbers. It says more Californians would vote to keep Governor Gavin Newsom in office than oust him, and if a recall election likely later this year were held right away, a new poll shows. The survey, conducted by the independent California-based firm Probolsky Research, found 46% of voters and 53% of those who say they are likely to vote in a recall election would vote to keep Newsom in office. 40% of all voters and 35% of likely recall voters would vote to remove him. So that means that in terms of overall voters, he's only got a 6% lead. But in terms of people who are likely to take part in the recall election, he has a much bigger lead here. What is that, like an 18-point lead? So he's got a far, far bigger lead when comparing people who are likely to vote in the recall election. So those are, that's a comfortable margin, I would say, in terms of... Now, I did some research on the recall election because I was a bit confused as to how it even works. But I guess they simultaneously have a question on it where it says, are you voting to recall whoever, Gavin Newsom? And then the second question is, if yes, who do you want to replace him? So I guess both of them take place at the same time, essentially, is what's going on. But it goes on to give us some details about the race. It says about 2/3 of Democratic voters would vote to keep Newsom in office, a relatively low number, but one that hints he has room to grow if he can keep his party in line. Registered Democrats outnumber registered Republicans in California by a nearly 2-to-1 margin. So I think I know what's going on based off of that, and I think Gavin Newsom knows as well. Now, Gavin Newsom has not even really addressed this whole recall movement until now. He just recently, a couple weeks ago, started doing this. But I think he knows about this. He must have been either looking at the polls, his team was either looking at the polls, or they were doing in-house polls, which is what most campaigns and politicians do. And what they see is this, right? Only 2/3 of Democratic voters would vote to keep Newsom in office. And so what that means is there's more progressive people who feel like, hey, you have not done enough, and you've also made some mistakes, which I would definitely agree with. He has not done enough. And so that's why when you saw Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren coming out endorsing him, stumping for him, that's probably why. I think Gavin Newsom knows what's going on. And that, that swing vote essentially here, which is these more progressive Democratic voters, are really going to be the ones who determine this. This is while Republicans overwhelmingly plan to vote to oust Newsom, critical centrist voters, those who do not align with either party, narrowly break in favor of allowing him to finish a term that would run through the end of 2022. Voters with no party preference say they plan to vote no on the recall by a slim 43 to 41% margin. This is black voters favor keeping Newsom in office by a wide 72% to 19% gap. White voters oppose the recall by an 11% margin, but Hispanic or Latino voters favor ousting him by a 45% to 41% margin. Among Asian voters, 49% support keeping the governor in office compared with 29% who support his removal. So I can't exactly tell you the specific reason as to why Hispanic voters have such a low, rate of, it's only 4%, only a 4% margin. Actually it's a negative 4% margin. He said they're actually voting in favor of ousting him. So it's a negative 4 margin. So why is it that, Hispanic and Latino voters are in favor of ousting him? one of the main conclusion I would come to is, man, Hispanic voters came through for Bernie Sanders in the primary, which indicates that Hispanic voters, at least in California, it seems, are more progressive than other groups. And they just feel like Gavin Newsom hasn't really been coming through for them. He hasn't really been doing much progressive, or not being progressive enough. That's the conclusion I would come to. That could be wrong, certainly, on incomplete data, but from what we've seen, that appears to be what I would come to. Now, it says supporters of the effort to recall Newsom turned in more than 2.1 million signatures last week, all but certainly qualifying to force the governor to defend his job sometime later this year. After legal hurdles and statutory review periods, the election is likely to be held in the fall. So there's going to be, it's certainly going to happen. Okay, this recall election is definitely going to happen. Newsom has begun battling back. Finally, he took way too long to do this, actually. He took way too long to start up his machine to fight it back. I do not support the recall effort, mostly because I would agree that he has not done enough. But, I saw the dangers. I look back and I see the dangers of what happened with Gray Davis, where, he gets out, he was progressive, and then this Arnold Schwarzenegger idiot who has no political experience, none of that. He's a fucking actor, and he got elected governor. He's a Republican douchebag. It was so dumb. So the people who have been spearing this movement are Republican idiots who don't want to wear masks and don't support lockdowns. So I do not support this recall movement at all whatsoever. And even though he's not progressive enough, hasn't done enough, I certainly am not supporting a movement that is being spearheaded to take this guy out from a bunch of anti-maskers. And I really don't want something like an Arnold Schwarzenegger to repeat. Okay, always look back in history, see what happened.